wanted to show you an example of how we looked at horizontal alignment for the training that we're doing with the teachers. So this is the first few days of our timeline for our teacher training in July. And so if you'll look on the second page at the bottom, day 1, Tuesday, you'll see we have a density explored lesson. So at this point we're doing relative density. So for relative density, math is not a required component because they're comparing densities. They're looking at relative density. And then if you go to the next page, on page 3.
Well, it would be that you would call it sink or float kind of things.
Right. So
they're
then
not calculating density.
They're not calculating density at that point. And so later in that day for math instruction, you'll see that we're doing density as a ratio and proportionality. The next day for science, we are calculating density. So how was horizontal alignment looked at and utilized there? Well, how are they supposed to calculate density until they know how to calculate density, or how to calculate density, essentially. And so it's really important to be able to look at both the math and the science and be able to make sure that the math is taught before it is needed in science. If you look in your, under your leadership tab, it's a few pages in, it's pink, before it gets purple. You'll see instructions for identifying misalignment between math and science. And this is what the mixed up teachers use as they are looking through a little bit further. Let's pass the lesson plans. One more page, there you are. And just pass the lesson plans. One more, there you go. And so it's got step-by-step directions for them on how to really break this down and take a look at it. So they're listing the math teaks over here in the first column, identifying the associated math keywords, putting it in the next column, entering the week that that math teaks is to be taught per the scope and sequence, putting that next, identifying the science teaks where the math skill is needed, then identifying the science words, and then entering the week that the science would need to be taught then, looking at where the math is taught in the scope and sequence. So really breaking it down to make sure that if a science teak is being addressed, that they have the foundation in math in order for them to be successful.
So when you say a misalignment, you mean?
For example, with the density, if they're being asked to calculate density, but they haven't covered that in their math class yet. And so just putting things in the correct order.
And we have required, this is one of the requirements before they're given their stipend. So there's certain things that we require for them to be eligible for their stipend. So it's not just attendance. And this is the form that we morph through different ones. And we require them to turn in a horizontal alignment between math and science.
Oh, that's great.
Again, to identify those and to talk with their districts about it.
So your recommendation for our district would be to have our teachers do this, especially if our mix-it-up teachers are already doing it, and then to realign the scope and sequence of TEACS resource.
They've been doing it not with TEACS resource, and at that conference, they were very specific. It said, you should not change the scope and sequence.
Of course.
But if it's wrong,
Well,
then you have to be.
We change ours.
I can see
We
how
do
in
at the
math,
very beginning of the year, what we do is we align it between math and science. And even history, we look at that in relationship to English. English and history are also kind of a good pair. And they look at what they're going to do, and we go by 6 weeks segments. And they create a TEACS calendar. Actually, it's a 3-week TEACS calendar. so that I know, but that still gives them freedom and creativity, which is something that as a teacher I lost and didn't like when they took it away. On this day you will teach this, on this day you will teach this, on this day you'll teach this. And I was like, oh my God, my creativity is an important part of me and teaching and what I enjoy. And I thought, I don't want to take that away, but I need to make sure they're following the TEKS and that they're getting coverage in those areas. And they have a choice. Okay, the kids know these TEKS really well, but these they struggle with. So I'm going to take some time away from this and I'm going to give more time here.
Actually, Divine has a history of it before they even came into mix a few years ago, that they were using a practice called curriculum on the wall, where they would just, the 4 core disciplines would put their topics up there, literally, more so probably than their TEKS. So they were having conversations. This was back when we had double block math and they had an extra period to be able to do this. So they were already starting looking at these cross disciplines, not just between math and science, but all of the disciplines. Then they came into mix, and so we started looking, more at it that way. In talking with the 7th grade campus, Lockhart Junior High, and the 7th grade teacher, Melissa Zulik, she says she doesn't see an issue of misalignment with math and science. I'm saying, well, maybe, because we don't use as much math in 7th grade science as we do in 6th and 8. But I said, that doesn't mean that you don't look at it. So you need to make sure that that's not an issue. And that means if there's the conversation. So they had already started looking at things like that. And as I said, science is flexible. It doesn't matter when you teach earth science or when you teach biology or any of the other disciplines. You may have to teach one of the TEKS that's quote out of place, if you would, because it's needed there. But even in 6th grade, I had a big, almost argument with a 6th grade teacher who said that they had to learn how to calculate density to understand earth science. And I said, no, they don't. This was at the end, I'm pretty adamant at that point. No, they don't. If they're trying to understand plate tectonics, it's usually the heavier one sinks and the lighter one rises over it. They do not have to know numbers of density of basalt or granitic materials to understand that. It's just heavier or lighter. And she never gave up the position, and I never gave up the position either, but it's those kind of conversations that you need to, what do kids really need to know about this? The streamlining of the TEKS is going to occur, it's supposed to occur this summer. They have not selected a hotel. I've already had the conversation with them about that. And I am sure we're going to remove calculate density. I don't know about speed, that's a different issue, but I think calculate density is going to go. So that's not going to be as big of an alignment issue.
But something else we would do, which is not as critical now that they push the testing back further, but what we would do is look at what were the tested TEKS, and we taught those first. And if it wasn't a tested TEK, if we could, what we would do is we would push that to the end of the calendar to make sure that we covered all of the tested TEKS before we covered any of the non-tested TEKS.
And I would strongly disagree with that, strongly. Those supporting TEKS are critical, they're foundational for the readiness TEKS. You cannot do that. You cannot, Lickert was telling me that they were doing that a couple of years ago. And I said, what? Why would anybody think that when you've got sequential ideas? Because, you've got to scaffold it. You cannot teach those supporting TEKS last. They're not going to understand the readiness TEKS. So I would strongly suggest that y'all rethink that.
Well,
I know the district does that.
In math you don't, because it builds on itself.
Exactly, and so does science.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
As strongly as math?
Absolutely.
See, I wasn't aware of that.
Well, maybe that's something we need to look at, and look at some examples with that. I don't know about English or ELA or social studies. I don't know.
Those not critical, and that's mostly where English is where that happens.
Yeah.
But there are some things you need to know before others, but it's not at all like math or science, where, okay, you're going to teach this part, And once you know that, you can go over and teach this part, and it's not gonna affect this.
Oh, I was flabbergasted when Jennifer told me that.
Well, for example, poetry is poetry,
Right.
whereas short stories is short stories.
Sure.
So that you can mess around with and change the order. And that's usually where the ones that are not tested fall the most is in ELA.
Well, the tested, the readiness ones are the culminating idea.
But-
So if you take away the scaffolding of that culminating idea, you've taken away the foundation for it. Which I feel strongly about that.
Okay, I get that.
Okay, let's look at some examples later on. I'll
I'd like
pull
to.
some out.
Okay.
Yep. Was that a district idea about teaching the supporting ones last?
That
It
wasn't ours.
wasn't,
No, no, we just,
and I don't think it was all supporting, I think it was, they just looked and saw which TEKs, whether supporting or readiness, were tested. I don't know though,
I
we
think
weren't
that
there.
is absolutely wrong to look at what's tested. You should teach what the discipline needs, what children need.
critiques.
Now, it doesn't mean that you not look at what's tested, but that cannot drive your decision. And if what's tested is wrong, then somebody needs to know to take it back to TEA and the state board and say, I like STAR personally, I like Science STAR. I think there's some problems with it, but I don't want it to go away. Because if it's interpreted correctly, it should drive toward effective best practices. What it has not done, and I have no clue how that happened, is vocabulary.
It's because it's not being done at the lower grades.
It's not being taught at the lower grades.
Science is
Whose
not-
fault is that?
Exactly.
Okay, so we're gonna look at best practices in just a moment, and I want to talk with you, whoops, safety hazard there, about what do we hope to accomplish these next 2 days and then the academic year? What do you think? What do you want to accomplish? Why are you here?
I'm hoping to build a better program with my science and my math for the kids. All the best practice strategies that I'm trying to impart on the teachers, like what does that look like? And I'm hoping that that continues to spread a little bit.
Okay?
To go down to the lower grade level. So if they see your passion and they know you're passionate about it and that you're down in the trenches with them, then they're more apt to.
And Anna actually has teachers who were jealous because she was in, specifically with some individual teachers working with them on questions like we just had a moment ago.
I should have discovered then their love languages is quality time. I wasn't spending quality time with them.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yes, I'm like,
Okay.
I
so-
think for me, just even going to that on Saturday workshop, it made me understand how the way I was taught science and math is not best practice, like it's not what our kids need. And so I have to learn better how to teach my math and science because I don't know. And I think being here is going to help me understand the concepts.
At least from a supervision perspective.
Correct.
Yeah. Not necessarily that you could do it.
Right,
But you
but
know it when you see it.
Also, when we're talking about the lower grades, I think we do, like, I love Mix It Up for 5th grade, but I do feel like there's that gap for the kinder through 4th
We've
grade
talked
levels.
about
I
that.
know, I have
Yeah.
too, because I feel like teachers use vocabulary that they know or concepts that they know instead of really know science or really know math. So I feel like it's my responsibility to at least know the concepts in 5th grade so I can have a better understanding down in the lower grades what to expect and see and help them also.
I want to empower my teachers. I want to give them a level of confidence so that when they're developing their lesson plans and their classes, engagement is not going to be a challenge for them. Engagement is something that's going to, I feel, when you work with Mix It Up, especially now that I've had an opportunity to observe what you guys do, yours is engagement. And that's a critical part of teaching as far as I'm concerned, because that's when your kids are learning. They're getting involved, they're wanting to solve the problem, they're learning how to research the answer, they're developing and creating skills. But in order to do that, my teachers need to be empowered to know how to do that, and that's what I want. I want powerful teachers that are empowered within themselves because they know what to do and what needs to be done in order to help those students.
I had a science fair project with one of my high school students years ago, and he did a survey of all of the 5 high schools in Northeast School District, which is where I was teaching then, about why or what students like about science, their science courses. The number one reason why they said they did not like science, the number one reason, lack of enthusiasm by the teacher. The number one reason, not that it was hard or they had difficulty here or there, whatever, lack of enthusiasm by the teacher.
How could you teach science and not be enthusiastic?
Oh, we've seen it.
Wow.
I think
Well, I mean, you see it in
unfortunately,
college. I mean, you see people who have majors in that area, and they're not enthusiastic about their instruction. So it's there, and that's something.
But it lends itself
I think
so
as a
well.
teacher, you have to be an actor in some ways. I know when I taught marine science, and we were talking about cormorants drying their wings, So would I do that on stage? Absolutely not. I could never do anything like that on stage. But I can do those kind of things with my students. And so the idea of being enthusiastic about everything that you teach is not, well, I don't really like this unit, but I have to, not that kind of language with it. Anna, did you say why you were, what you want out of the project?
Yes.
Okay, all right. The thing that we want to focus on, and it goes back to what Faith was saying earlier, was about what are those best practices. So there are STEM identified best practices, and we're going to look at that inventory. But first, what I want you to do, you should have some notebook paper, and just quickly jot down, there's some back there in the middle. Jot down some STEM-specific best practices, just with keywords, not complete sentences or anything, that you think or know about. STEM-specific best practices.